Welcome to the New Thinking for a New World podcast, where we explore the most pressing issues that are challenging and changing our societies. We are looking for new thinking and new solutions wherever we can find them. Listen as host Alan Stoga, the Tallberg Foundation's chairman, challenges his guests for analysis, ideas and actions. Together, we can help make our world at least a bit better.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine may be one of those seminal events that will divide our future histories. That's obviously true for the combatants, but other countries and other peoples will almost certainly be profoundly changed by this war, regardless of how it ends. Consider the small country of Georgia, less than 4 million people, located at the eastern end of the Black Sea, sharing an almost 900-kilometer border with Russia. Liberated by the collapse of the Soviet Union, and like Ukraine and Moldova, demonstrating strong desire to escape its history and geography to pursue a future as an integral part of Europe and the West. Unfortunately, neither neighboring Russia, which several years ago seized and still holds 20% of Georgian territory, nor the governing political party, Georgia Dream, seem to share that aspiration. What happens next? Another hotspot that could lead to another war? Or a country that could lever the deep support that Ukraine has elicited to secure its own future as a Western democracy? My guest today has strong views on what should happen. Nino Evgenidze, Executive Director of the Economic Policy Research Center in Tbilisi, Georgia, deeply believes that her country's future lies in democracy and the West. Welcome, Nino.
Thank you so much, Alan, having me. Thanks a lot for this opportunity to speak with a wide range of audience.
Let's start with what is certainly an undiplomatic question. Do you think that somehow the Russian war on Ukraine might actually benefit Georgia by rallying support for the country and its aspirations in the West?
No, I don't think so, because Georgia was a first victim of the Russia invasion and all these horrible wars, what is going and how they are bullying their neighbors. Not only in 2008, but early 90s when the Soviet Union was just break up, Georgia was a first victim of this war. And in 1992, there was the first ethnic cleaning of the Georgians, and 10,000 people were killed and 500,000 people were kicked out from their own territories in Abkhazia, and at that time, unfortunately, world was not interested in this part of the world, unfortunately. And even if you look to back to the history and follow how this was the developing from the Russia side, even in 2008, there was not adequate response from the world when Russia invaded Georgia. And for our listeners, it took the 13 years of the European Court of Human Rights, and just recently last year was the statement made that the war in 2008 was started by Russians, because this issue still was the issue of the discussions. Did we provoke Russia or not? And, even the foreign Western leaders, they were repeating all this time and some kind of bullying Georgia that we provoked this greatest Russia to start this war, And unfortunately, world cannot stop Russia in 2008, but I strongly believe that nowadays it's everyone's responsibility and duty to stop them into Ukraine.
So the obvious question is, why is the West responding now in the Ukraine case, but didn't respond to Georgia and Moldova and other countries?
I don't know. It was some kind of the romanticization after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, some kind of all Western, the intellectuals and the leaders, they were believing that the one day Russia also will be a democratic country. But unfortunately, it does not happen like this, because their imperialistic, mindset does not works like this, unfortunately. And you mentioned that the It was a breakdown of the Soviet Union 30 years ago, but Georgia was under the Russian occupation for 2 centuries, since 1801. We were they occupied by the Russian Tsarists, and then it changed. The Georgia was for 3 years the independent republic from 1918 to 1921. And we were in 1921 again occupied by Russian communists at that time. And unfortunately, the world changed because the war is going right now, and the Georgians were alarming. And together with the Georgians, also all Eastern European countries like Baltics, Poland, who were all the time, experienced this occupation and the Russian imperialistic, bullying, all the history. And we were warning the world that one day it's going to be knock at your door, and we were warning to the Ukrainians that the next is going to be you guys, because for the Russia, having this influence, having this iron curtain on the Black Sea, it's a strategical, their strategy, geopolitical strategy. They don't want anyone to succeed in their neighborhood. Because in 2008, why they attacked the Georgia? Because at that time, Georgia was a #1 country, fighting against the corruption. There was a tremendous reforms were done in the country. We were performing so well, and it was like a 2-digit economic growth. And all institutions started the modernization and the development. And Russia realized that they don't want anyone to see as a democratic country their neighborhood, because one day the Russian society also will demand that they want to live somewhere in a nice place, and why they were so getting so painfully the Rose Revolution, which happened in Georgia at that time in 2003, and then it followed by the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, that they were getting it as a national threat for them, because if the Georgia and Ukraine is going to succeed in this fight for freedom and democracy, it means that one day Russia also will get out from this authoritarian or dictatorship regimes. And it was a main reason why they're also attacking the country's freedom fighters like the Ukraine and Georgia and Moldova and some other neighbors, because they don't want to see anyone in a democratic path.
But certainly the big surprise of this chapter is how strongly the West has responded to the invasion of Ukraine. It's pretty clear Mr. Putin was surprised. I think most people were surprised. Put aside how the war ends, when it ends, we'll get to that in a second. But nevertheless, the response of the West is different this time. It is muscular. It may not be muscular enough. That's a different issue, but it is different. So do you expect that same muscular response in the Ukrainian case to extend to your country, to Georgia?
Yes, I'm pretty sure the situation is very different right now, because that this transatlantic unit between the United States and the Europe, it's very crucial for keeping Europe all and free and at peace, and all this idea to keeping this unity and the solidarity to each other, it's still alive, and it's needs to strengthening more. And the war in Ukraine, again, underlines this, how the West is united right now. It's really very promising. And I have to, acknowledge and to really be very thankful and grateful for the United States, because they are the main player on this regard to keeping Europe together, because the US leadership on this regard to keep this unity together is very important and the crucial one, in my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong, but it from our perspective, it looks like this. And the assistance, what they're providing for the Ukrainians are tremendous. And it also somehow provoked the other European countries to increase their support, the military support and the financial support for the Ukrainians, because war in Ukraine, it's not the Ukrainians' war, it's they're fighting for all of us. I strongly believe in this, because this fight is for freedom and democracy, and I'm pretty sure with unity we can crack down this Russian imperialism and stop them into.
But my question is about Georgia and what you expect, if anything, from the West in terms of Georgia's own pursuit of its potential democratic future in the West in particular.
Because the Georgia itself, the country and the people always were the pro-European and the pro-Western. You cannot find anyone that for decades, for at least if you look to the last 30-year history, and every year polls, shows that more than 89% of the Georgian population, they want to be a part of the European Union and they want to be a part of the NATO, And the Georgians itself, they contributed a lot for the world security, because the Georgian army and the military representatives, they were defending and fighting against the terrorism together with our strategic partners in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think that the Georgians sacrificed a lot for this world, the security on this issue. And I'm pretty sure that the Georgia is bigger than the little tiny Georgia, and its importance to having this island of democracy very close to the Russia, and not only to the Russia. We are the island in a sea of the authoritarians. If you look to our to our neighbors,
What you're arguing, and I accept the argument, is why the West should be supportive. What I'm asking is, what do you want from the West?
Yeah, when we're asking for this kind of help or support, it doesn't mean that we're asking the West to come to Georgia and fight for our freedom on behalf of us or instead of us. It's not like this, but what we are facing right now, that the Georgian society is fighting against the corruption and oligarchy and the kleptocracy, because unfortunately our country is captured by the Russian oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili, who controls all the institutions in the country. And we ask the West to support on this regard. We're going to fight inside of the country to strengthen the democratic institutions. But unfortunately, as you know, that this kind of Russian oligarchs, they keep their money in the Western financial institutions. And when we're talking about the support, this support means that to put more sanctions against the Russian oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili, the personal sanctions, not sanctions against the country, because the Georgian people do not deserve this, and the sanctions against the Bidzina Ivanishvili, who is undermining the Georgian democracy, and during the war in Ukraine, he is supporting the Putin and their regime to avoid the sanctions. And I don't know if you heard, recently there was a statement from the State Department very high official Jim O'Brien, that he named he listed the 5 countries who are helping the Russians to avoid the sanctions, and also getting the microchips and some other kind of stuff, which is very important for the Russian military to rehabilitate and reconstruct their the Su-25s and bomb shells and some other stuff, which we think that one of the main reasons to get sanctions against the Bidzina Ivanishvili, because it will help the Georgian civil society and the Georgian public to get out from the Russian oligarch who controls everything in our country, and everything is under his control.
I understand that, but we're almost a year and a half into this war, and the only sanctions thus far from the U.S. has been aimed at 4 judges.
Yeah.
So there haven't been the kind of sanctions, either the personal sanctions nor the kind of sanctions that Mr. O'Brien was talking about, which are not personal sanctions necessarily, but aimed at the country. So you would like to see the U.S. in particular sanction the leadership. Anything else?
And also to support the democratic players inside the country, because it's very important. These people need really support. And as you are aware, one of the head of the Georgian independent media, the head, he's sitting in a jail for nothing. And all human rights international organizations recognize him as a political prisoner, and his case is a politically motivated case. And we need their support in terms of the pushing the Georgian government, because it's definitely against of the free speech and the freedom of expression. And again, we're in a democratic backsliding, but unfortunately, some of the instruments which can make this regime, weaken this regime, is a hand of our Western partners, and namely with the United States and the European Union.
If you feel that the world lacks global leaders, please help support the Tallberg Foundation programs. Individual donations are being accepted at tallbergfoundation.org/donate. That's TALLBERG foundation.org/donate.
Georgia has imported Western forms of democracy. You have elections. The current government, Georgia Dream, was elected not with a majority, but with enough of a victory that it could organize the parliament. We have similar cases in other countries where the forms of democracy produce an outcome that isn't necessarily democratic. And I think the West is a bit confounded as to what to do. You have the Turkish case. You have a number of other countries around the world where people who certainly don't pass muster as Democrats end up leading countries through an electoral process. That by way of introduction, because Georgia has another election next year. Your system is not designed, neither is the West designed to protect minority voters. It isn't a consensus system. It's a winner-take-all system in practice. How would you change the structures of Georgia politics so that if you lose, you're still in the game?
If you are aware, the European Union, when they granted the Moldova and Ukraine with this, the European Union candidacy status, they did not grant it to Georgia on this stage. And there were produced 12 recommendations, which should be done by the Georgian government before the elections, and all these 12 plans includes the very, systematic reforms. Without implementing these reforms, you will never, ever get any changes in this country, and why the current Georgian Dream government is so resistant to implement these reforms, because if they're going to implement these reforms, it automatically means that they are losing the next election, because everything how they keep this power last a few years is all about their rigging the elections, falsificating, having the surveillance against the all political party leaders and the civil society organizations and all the stakeholders who are involved in the election process or the staff. And also this latest polls shows that they totally lose the supporters. And the war in Ukraine, after the war in Ukraine, they cannot play in this a gray zone anymore. To be clear on this regard, because before they were with using this kind of the disinformation or the propaganda stuff. They were saying that we're pro-Europeans, but after the war in Ukraine, I think from the Russians, they got an instruction that they have to, take a side, very clear side. Are they on the Russian side? And unfortunately, after that, they've lost their supporters. If it's going to be an election right now, I don't know how they're going to succeed because, why this Georgian society there every single month they're protesting against this kind of the steps and backsliding from the current Georgian government because we want to change them by the elections, not on the a violent way, but with the democratic, very peaceful, the democratic ways to continue our, the democratic development, because we have the experience in 2012, we peacefully changed the previous government by election, and they've lost the elections, by the way, with the same proportion as Georgian Dream government lost last election, but they didn't left the power. This is a main problem because of the Russian oligarchy. And when you were talking about the parallels with Turkey or some other authoritarian countries, I strongly believe that the Georgia is a different case because it's driven by Russian money, which comes from outside of the country. Otherwise, it's not the internal issue.
Just for the record, the government of Georgia claims that they are 80% along in implementing those 12 planks of transformation.
It was just recently, last week, that there was a hearing at European Parliament about the Georgian progress, and there were several European members of the Parliament, from Estonia and some other countries. They were saying that we're not implementing these plans at all. It's all about unfortunately, just to we're not implementing this plan as a country, and the Georgian Dream government is not doing anything to get this candidacy status for the country. I strongly believe that they're deliberately sabotaging their own country not to get the candidacy status. Otherwise, I don't have any other opinion on this regard, why they're doing this, whatever they are doing right now, to taking this future from the Georgian people to be a part of the European Union and the NATO.
So would you oppose the EU granting candidate status before the 2024 election?
I strongly believe that they have to granting the Georgia with the candidacy status, but in a parallel regime, they have to impose the sanctions against the Russian oligarch Nino Evgenidze and the current Georgian government representatives, weakening their power before the election 2024.
What if they only do the former? What if they only recognize the candidacy status? What will be the consequence for your politics, do you think?
There is a different opinions on this regard. Some people is gonna saying that it's gonna be strengthening the Georgian Dream government again, but I can say that there is a rationale on this position. That it's gonna be another Hungary, or that maybe we're gonna get another Orban style country or something like this, but. I believe in Georgian people and Georgian society, and also the being Europe in Georgia, it's going to be anyway squeezing their authoritarian power into the country because I can say that it's going to be an additional strength, giving the strength to the Georgian civil society and the political parties inside of the country to do more on this regard, to get out from this current Russian oligarchy, what we have right now.
Let's go back to the direct impact of the war. there have been reports of hundreds of thousands of Russian, I'm going to call them draft dodgers, which is what they seem to be, seeking refuge in Georgia. I've heard that some Georgians are skeptical of these refugees, and maybe should be so-called refugees, but that's going to be my question.
Thank you so much for this question, because, I mean, unfortunately, you know that what we are facing right now, we have some kind of like more than 300,000 Russians right now who are living in the country. And then according with the official statistical data, in September, 1,200,000 Russians crossed the Georgia-Russia border. Currently, we have the Georgian statistic do not publishing anymore the official data how many Russians we have, but there is with some different data who are saying that there are 300,000. I strongly believe that it's kind of like, the threat for the Georgian national security, because what the Georgian government is doing, they're not allowing for example, anti-Putinist Russians to enter to the country. You know, how the ordinary Georgian, the custom officer knows to who is I don't know, one or another guy, because they're just declining and not allowing all these Russian dissidents to enter to the country. And I strongly believe that they have some kind of information from the Russia's security services. Otherwise, how they can differentiating these people from each other. And unfortunately, the people who are staying in Georgia, and if you ask them, and there are several, the TV shows asking randomly in the streets that, that Georgia is occupied and the war is going Russia. And all these people, most the majority of these Russians, they're supporting the Vladimir Putin. Unfortunately, they don't want to be fighting. Otherwise, if some Buryatians or Chechens are fighting instead of them to get more territories of Georgia or Ukraine, they're very fine with that.
So what is the cost to your country? 300,000 people in a country of less than 4 million is a lot of people.
A lot of people, yeah.
Is it a drag on the economy? Are they working? Are they taking jobs from Georgians? Are they bringing money with them on the other hand? So I guess that's the larger question, the impact, not just of that Russian diaspora, whatever the motivation, but the impact of the war on Georgia, on ordinary Georgian citizens.
There is a speculation, and especially the Georgian government representatives and the Prime Minister of Georgia is very proud that we have a 2-digit economic growth and money is coming to country and all those kind of things, but I'm an economist, and if you look to the structure, how it operates, unfortunately, Georgian economy since 2006 never been relied on the Russia so much. And, that after the war in Ukraine started, the export-import turnover tripled with Russia. And, we're a very small country. And before we know that we have only this kind of very small amount of the products, what we can export into the Russia. But now we are exporting this kind of washing machines or something like this, which later Russians are using for their military purposes, And unfortunately, that they're not bringing the investment to the country. They're not creating the new jobs. And our economy, if you look to the structure, it's based on consumption. But is this based on consumption is based with the Russians are consuming goods and products in Georgia. We kind of the Russian kind of money laundering hub, or some kind of Russian money, the moving hub in this region, because if you look to the picture, how the Georgian society and how the Georgian economy is reacting on this, there is in a last quarter was a investment decreased by 15%. And, the 200,000 Georgians left the country because they think there is no any more opportunity in this country. They left to the European or United States. And also the unemployment rate went up. And we have 800,000 people who are getting who are under the poverty line and getting the social assistance, and how the Georgian people are benefiting from this. We're not benefiting from this, where our situation is getting worse and worse, because it looks like that we're paying the taxes, Russians being in Georgia, because they have, the economically, the Russians are more wealthier than the Georgians, and they're bringing the money and especially the cash, and with this cash, because of that, the inflation rate is very high. And for the Georgians, all prices on the goods and the products increased. And for Russians, it's fine, but for us, it's devastating. And this is a situation we are right now, and all our economy and all sectors of our economy now totally dependent on Russia. It's kind of a very bad situation we are right now. I mean, this is kind of like a fight for this, for our freedom. And I think that for the West to having Georgia on their side is very important, because Georgians were always being the freedom fighters, and society was always supporting the West. And most pro-American society in this region, I strongly believe you cannot find anyone else like us.
Let me end with what is probably going to be a provocative question, which is this. There's a school of thought among analysts that when all is said and done, the war might end in a cold peace. That is to say, Ukraine does not recapture all of its territory, Crimea in particular, but it's fought to a standstill. If that's the case, and I'm not arguing it's good or bad, it's a question. If that's the consequence, what would be the impact on Georgia?
I don't even consider this question, or I don't want even to respond in if it's going to happen like this, because I strongly believe that the Ukraine will win this war. Otherwise, it's going to be end of the Europe as well, because if Europe thinks and the West thinks that if Ukraine will lose this war or come up with this negotiation table with this frozen conflict as we experienced here right now, then unfortunately the next is going to be the Baltic countries, and then Poland, and some other deeper and deeper and deeper Europe, which is going to be occupied, ruled, and annexed by the Russians. And I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen anytime sooner, and Ukraine will win. And I'm pretty sure that this victory is going to be a game changer, and also this kind of giving more motivation to all freedom fighters all around the world, because we can, with this victory, we can prove that the freedom is prevail, and the democracy and the freedom. I don't think that anyone can change this, the paradigm, because there is no other better system than the democracy, and I strongly believe on this. And people in Ukraine and earlier in Georgia were dying for this freedom and democracy, and I strongly believe that we will win.
Thank you very much for this conversation, Nino. We will see what we'll see in the future, and I look forward to having this conversation again with you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and till the victory, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you for joining us. Please rate our show on Apple Podcast and subscribe. Meanwhile, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, or you can subscribe to our newsletter at tallbergfoundation.org to learn more about our work. That's TALLBERG foundation.org. Thank you, and we'll be back again next week for another episode of Tallberg's New Thinking for a New World. This podcast was brought to you through the generous support of SNF, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation.